Good evening, everyone. We're continuing through Judges this evening. Tonight we're going to hit our first big story. The first couple stories are kind of smaller snippets, and this one's kind of a bigger one. So this is Gideon, and this is one of the, I like Gideon. Gets that lots of violence and fun stuff going on. I also have a nephew named Gideon, so I'm biased. So we're starting at chapter 6. The Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hands of Midian for 7 years. The hand of Midian prevailed over Israel, and because of Midian, the Israelites provided for themselves hiding places in the mountains, caves, and strongholds. For whatever the Israelites put in seed, the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them. They would encamp against them and destroy the produce of the land as far as the neighborhood of Gaza, and leave no sustenance in Israel, and no sheep or ox or donkey. For they and their livestock would come up, and they would even bring their tents as thick as locusts. Neither they nor their camels could be counted. So they wasted the land as they came in. Thus Israel was greatly impoverished because of Midian, and the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help. When the Israelites cried to the Lord on account of the Midianites, the Lord sent a prophet for the Israelites, and he said to them, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I led you up from Egypt and brought you out of the house of slavery, and I delivered you from the hands of the Egyptians and from the hands of all who oppressed you, and drove you out before you, and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am the Lord your God. You shall not pay reverence to the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you live, but you have not given heed to my voice." Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak of Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, as his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, you mighty warrior." Gideon answered him, "But sir, if the Lord is with us, why then has this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our ancestors recounted to us, saying, 'Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt?' But now the Lord has cast us off and given us into the land of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the might of yours and deliver Israel from the hands of Midian. I hereby commission you." He responded, "But sir, how can I deliver Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least of my family." The Lord said to him, "But I will be with you, and you shall strike down the Midianite, every one of them." Then he said to them, "If now I have found favor with you, then show me a sign that if you speak with me, do not depart from here until I come to you and bring you out my present and set it before you." And he said, "I will stay until you return." So Gideon went into the house and prepared a kid and unleavened cakes from an ephah of flour. The meat he put in a basket, and the broth he put in a pot, and brought them under the oak and presented them. The angel of God said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened cakes and put them on this rock, and pour out the broth." And he did so. When the angel of the Lord reached out the tip of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat, the unleavened cakes and fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened cakes, and the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. Then Gideon perceived that it was the angel of the Lord. And Gideon said, "Help me, Lord God, for I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord said to him, "Peace be to you. Do not fear. You shall not die." Then Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and called it, "The Lord is Peace." To this day it still stands at Ophrah, which belongs to the Abiezrites. So our first introduction to Gideon, we have the setup. Again, it's always like the preamble. Israel is in dire need. The Midianites are oppressing them. And so God's going to call a judge to save them, going to call that hero. And when we're first introduced to him, he is not looking good. He is an unlikely hero. And like we've seen that time and time again. God likes to use the unlikely. And so we have him in a wine press. And so if you have a wine press, you have it in the ground, and you put all your grapes and you stomp it down, and so it has a wall around it to contain it, and then it drains out. And so you have the wall around it so people can't see you. And so just imagine him hunched over, smacking at the wheat to get all the kernels off. It is not an efficient use of your space, but he's doing it so he can do it so nobody's going to see him doing it, so he can actually hopefully preserve some of this wheat. And so it's a very humbled position. He bunched over and not getting a lot out of it and that kind of stuff. And he says himself, I am the least of the least tribe. I'm the lowest person in the least tribe of my clan. So why would I use it? And again, it's setting up because God is going to use the weak. Because if it's somebody powerful, well, then we could just think it was because of their own power. No, God uses the weak because it's to let us know that God is using his power and he is the one to save us. And then we have the message of Israel. Actually, this is very reminiscent of what we'll see when Elijah comes around, where you'll have the sacrifice of a cattle and the priest of Baal, and it's consumed. And the idea, okay, it's acceptable to the Lord because it's been consumed. And so it's okay, God, it's a sign for God. And so it's that, and it's reminiscent. And it's that idea of the angel of the Lord. The line between the angel of the Lord and the Lord himself is vague in the Old Testament. And so the message of the Lord appears. And just like, Abraham had the three visitors who were symbolized the Lord and were that message, so too he has that. So it's all the tropes are coming back. That night the Lord said to him, take your father's bull, the second bull, 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal that belongs to your father, and cut down the sacred pole that is beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God on top of the stronghold here, in proper order. Then take the second bull and offer it in the burnt offering with the wood and the sacred pole, that then you shall cut down. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord had told him. But because he was too afraid of his family and the townspeople to do it by day, he did it by night. So you see Gideon's whole story is going to be him getting braver and braver and braver. So he starts out weak, and he's eventually going to get braver as he goes. And so he does what the Lord asked to him, but he's kind of nervous about it. And so use your father. And so we can see how the corruption has infiltrated, because his own father is worshiping Baal and having the sacred pole and doing this. And so he's like, okay, no, you got to be the idol smasher. You have to tear this down and rededicate the altar, and that's how you have to do it. Okay, so he does it, but he does it at night because he's still a little nervous. He doesn't want to cause it. It reminds me of the gospel we had the other day, where Christ says, I come not to bring the peace but the sword, and to divide families against each other. Sometimes standing up for what's right means you have to have arguments. Then the townspeople rose early in the morning. The altar of Baal was broken down, and the sacred pole beside it was cut down, and the second bull was offered on the altar that had been built. So they said to one another, who has done this? After searching and inquiring, they were told, Gideon, son of Joash, did it. Then the townspeople said to Joash, bring out your son, so that he may die, for he has pulled down the altar of Baal and cut down the sacred pole beside it. But Joash said to all who were arrayed against him, will you contend for Baal, or will you defend his cause? Whoever contends for him shall be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him contend for himself, because this altar has been pulled down. Therefore, on that day, Gideon was called Jerubbaal, which, that is to say, let Baal contend against him, because he pulled down this altar, his altar. So even Joash, it was his thing. You can see that was because of the people, and he kind of stands up for his son. So that's good. That turned out well that he stood up for his son. And this is, again, very much like the Elijah sacrifice, because in that same case, it's going to be Baal. And they're like, well, can Baal hear you? Is he going to speak for himself? Which God is going to stand up for his people? Then all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east came together. And crossing the Jordan, they encamped in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord took possession of Gideon, and he sounded the trumpet, and the Abiezrites were called out to follow him. He sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, and they too were called out to follow him. He also sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they went up to meet them. These are all of the northern tribes. So we're already seeing the divisions among the tribes and how they kind of associate with each other. So these are the tribes that live in what is now North Israel. So Jerusalem is centered in the south Judah is centered around in the south around what is now Jerusalem, and they're gathered in the northern, what will be the Sea of Galilee in that area. Then Gideon said to God, "In order to see whether you will deliver Israel by my hand, you have said, I am going to lay a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. And if there is dew on the fleece alone, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will deliver Israel by my hand. And you have said," and it was so. Then he rose early next morning and squeezed the fleece. He wrung enough dew from the fleece to fill a bowl with water. Then Gideon said to God, "Do not let your anger burn against me. Let me speak one more time. Let me please make trial with the fleece just once more. Let it be dry only on the fleece, and on the ground let there be dew." And God did so on that night. It was dry, and the fleece only, and all the ground there was dew. So this is, again, think about Abraham and kind of wheeling and dealing with God. We see this kind of theme of testing God and kind of doing it and that kind of stuff. And in Gideon's case, he is rewarded for it, or not rewarded, but God acquiesced. But again, the main point is we're seeing Gideon get braver and braver. And so it's now he's still starting off, even though he's done a lot so far, even now he's Jerubbaal, he still building up his confidence. Then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the troops that were with him rose early and encamped beside the spring of Harod, and the camp of Midian was north of them, below the hill of Morah in the valley. The Lord said to Gideon, "The troops with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand. Israel would only take the credit away from me, saying, 'My own hand has delivered me.' Now, therefore, proclaim this to hearing the troops. Whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home." Thus Gideon sifted them out. 22,000 returned, and 10,000 remained. So he's gathered this army, and they're there because that's what you have to do as the good Israelite and stuff. He says, okay, well, if you're scared, go home. And so Gideon's, again, kind of speaking to himself. Because remember, he was scared. And so now he's again learning that, becoming braver as they go. And so, okay, 2/3 go home and 10,000 remain. And again, God lays out, it's because of my hand, not because of you. I'm going to be the strength of the people. So that's why he always chooses the weak. Then the Lord said to Gideon, "The troops are still too many. Take them down to the water, and I will sift them out for you there. When I say, 'This one shall go with you,' he shall go with you, and when I say, 'This one shall not go with you,' he shall not go." So he brought the troops down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, "All those who lap the water with their tongues, as a dog laps, you shall put on one side. All those who kneel down to drink, putting their hand to their mouth, you shall put on the other side." The number of those that lapped were 300, but all the rest of the troops knelt down to drink. Then the Lord said to Gideon, "With the 300 that lapped I will deliver you, and give the Midianites into your hand. Let all the others go to their homes." So he took the jars of the troops from the hands and their trumpets, and he set them and the rest of Israel back on their own tents, but retained the 300. The camp of Midian was below him in the valley. So I've seen a lot of different explanations for why the differences between lapping and sticking your head in. One is that if you're lapping, you're lifting your thing up so you're still looking around, so you're more observant. I've heard another one that you're lapping, you might look a little crazier, so you're more intense and that kind of stuff. I don't really know if there's a major difference or if it's trying to make a big point, but the point is that God is sifting out the people. And there's also could be said, I've heard the other one too is like, okay, well, if they're lapping like dogs, the comparison to dogs is, again, loyalty and bravery. So they're going to be loyal to God, and so they're going to be the picked troops kind of thing. It's probably a mix of those things. I don't think it has a specific, it might have a specific meaning, but the specific meaning isn't as important as we're down to 300. So it's like the very elite or the very small group. So it's the 300 people. It's not a lot. So how is God going to save them with only 300? The same night the Lord said to him, "Get up, attack the camp, for I have given it into your hand. But if you fear to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah, and you shall hear what they say. And afterwards your hands shall be strengthened to attack the camp." Then he went down with his servant Purah to the outpost of the armed men, and here at the camp the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the people over the east lay along the valley as thick as locusts, and their camels were without number, countless as the sand on the seashore. When Gideon arrived, there was a man telling a dream to his comrade, and he said, "I had a dream, and in it a cake of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian, and came to the tent and struck it so that it fell. It turned upside down, and the tent collapsed." And his comrade answered, "This is no other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, a man of Israel. Into his hand God has given Midian and all the army." Then Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation. He worshipped, and he returned to the Lord, the camp of Israel, and said, "Get up, for the Lord has given the army of Midian into your hand." After he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, he put trumpets into the hands of all of them, and empty jars with torches in the side of the jars. He said to them, "Look at me and do the same, that I come to the outskirts of the camp. So as I do, then when I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then you also blow the trumpets around the whole camp and shout for the Lord and for Gideon." So Gideon and the 100 who were with him came to the outskirts of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch. Then they had just set the watch, and they blew the trumpets, and smashing the jars they were in their hands, so that 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the jars, holding in their left hand the torches, and in their right hand the trumpets to blow, and they cried, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." Every man stood in his place all around the camp, and all the men in camp ran. They cried out and fled. When they blew the 300 trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow and against all the army. And the army fled as far as Beth Shittah towards Zerah, as far as the border of Abel Maholah by Tabbath. And the men of Israel were called out from Naphtali and from Asher and from all Manasseh, and they pursued after the Midianites. Then Gideon sent messengers throughout all the hill country of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against the Midianites and seize the waters against them, as far as Beth-barah, and also the Jordan." So all the men of Ephraim were called out, and they seized the waters as far as Beth-barah, and also the Jordan. They captured the 2 captains of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb they killed at the winepress of Zeb. As they pursued the Midianites, they brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon beyond the Jordan. Okay, so this is like the battle, the great battle that kind of takes place. And it's a battle where they don't really have to fight, because this is how it works. So when you have the 300 men in 3 companies, and the accoutrements are important here. So the jar, the torch, and the trumpet. And so what this is really doing is it's recreating a storm. This is made much clearer in Hebrew, where the word for torch and the word for lightning are the same word. So you hold lightning in your hand when you have a torch. And so when they blow the trumpet, it's like thunder. And when they break the jars, it's like thunder. And so you have the great collateral, and then they all have lightning in their hands. So it's a storm coming down upon them. And now, and there's also something to be said about in a company, not everyone would have a torch. You'd have one guy with a torch with a company behind you. And so when the Midianites suddenly see torches all around them, it looks like there's lots and lots of people around them. It looks like a whole army is encamped about them when there's really only 300. But then when they try to find the army, they can't find it because there's only 300 men. So they know there's an army. They know they're crashing in. Everyone is shouting. There's noise. There are lights. We've been caught off guard. And so we need to start killing people or we're going to get killed. And so they start killing themselves because they're so big. They turn on themselves. They're like, well, that must be the enemy army. So they're thrown into confusion and start killing themselves because they can't find the enemy army. They think they become their own enemy. So in their small numbers, they're able to trick the enemy into thinking there's a big army, but because there isn't a big army, they can't find an enemy to attack, and so they attack themselves and they're thrown into disbursement. And so then they go spread out across, and so then you have like the cleaning up. So you go in, and then all the other tribes are now called in. And so you have, again, this is on the other side of the Jordan. So Ephraim, if you remember, stayed on the other side, and so now they're seizing the Jordan so that they can't get back across. So they've kind of captured them now. And they kill the two chiefs, and it ends at a wine press too. So one's at a wine press. So again, that coming full circle of being hunched and hidden in a wine press. And now they've killed the enemy in the wine press. So that comes full circle. And so it's that God uses their strength. What appears to be weakness, God uses as a strength. It's only because of their small numbers that he could throw them into such great confusion. Then the Ephraimites said to him, "What have you done to us, not to call us when a fight against the Midianites?" And they upbraided him violently. So he said to them, "What have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? God has given into your hands the captains of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. What have I been able to do in comparison with you?" Then he said this, their anger against them subsided. So now that they've won, they're upset. Well, how come we weren't here? How we wanted to be part of this? And he's just like, come on, it's better to, you're part of the victory. Stop complaining. Then Gideon came to the Jordan and crossed over, he and the 300 who were with him, exhausted and famished. So he said to the people of Sukkoth, "Please give some loaves of bread to my followers, for they are exhausted. I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." But the officials of Sukkoth said, "Do you already have in your possession the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna, that we should give bread to your army?" Gideon replied, "Well then, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into your hands, I will trample your flesh on the thorns of the wilderness and on briars." From there he went up to Peniel and made the same request to them. And the people of Peniel answered him as the people of Sukkoth had answered. So he said to the people of Peniel, "When I come back victorious, I will break down this tower." So this is kind of like a Sodom and Gomorrah moment, or like we heard in the gospel the other day, when you go and preach and they don't accept you and they reject you, it's better to do it. Okay, he's like, okay, if you're not with us, you're against us, and I'm giving you in. So when I come back victorious, this is what's going to happen. And so their rejection of hospitality. That's a big one. You don't reject hospitality. So they're rejecting hospitality, and they're going to have to pay for it. And Gideon warns them, but they're still not going to do it. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with their army, about 15,000 men, all who were left of all the army of the people of the east. For 120,000 men bearing arms had fallen. So Gideon went up by the caravan route east of Nobah and Jogbehah and attacked the army. And the army was off its guard. Zebah and Zalmunna fled, and he pursued them and took the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and threw all the army into a panic. So again, you have the small force defeating the bigger one because they're in panic. And so he keeps doing it. He does it the same way. The small number is overthrowing the larger number. And remember what I said when we talked about numbers in the book of Numbers and all that? So when we say thousands, this very well could be like using as a generic term for like company or like group. So it could be it's probably better to interpret this instead of like specifically 120,000 people. Like we want to be very scientific about this or empirical about this. It's probably more like 150 companies of troops. How many was in each company? We don't really know. But you can see that they've been devastated. They're down to about a tenth of their former force, and now they're going to even be shrinked even more. When Gideon, son of Joash, returned from the battle by the ascent of Heres, he caught a young man out of the people of Sukkoth and questioned him. And he listed for him the officials and elders of Sukkoth, 77 people. Then he came to the people of Sukkoth and said, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me, saying, 'Do you already have in your possession the heads of Zebah and Zalmunna, that we would give bread to your troops who are exhausted?' So he took the elders of the city, and he took thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them he trampled the people of Sukkoth. He also broke down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, 'What about the men whom you called at Tabor?' They answered, 'As you are, so were they every one of them. They represented the sons of the king.' And he replied, 'They were my brothers, the sons of my mother, as the Lord lives. If you had saved them alive, I would not kill you.' So he said to Jether, his firstborn, 'Go kill them.' But the boy did not draw his sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a boy. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, 'You come and kill us, for as the man is, so is his strength.' So Gideon proceeded to kill Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took the crescents that were on the necks of their camels." So now you can see this is going to play in a couple things with his son being afraid to do what is necessary. So first of all, we're going to see this play out with all of Gideon's sons, and there's going to be a whole nother story with that. But also, along with this, you can see now he's not afraid. Okay, well, his son is afraid, and that's going to cause issues in the future. But Gideon is no longer afraid. He's going to stand up and does what needs to do. He's going to take these people who have killed and attacked and raped and destroyed his people, and he's going to put an end to them. When the Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you and your son and your grandson also, for you have delivered us out of the hands of Midian," Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." Then Gideon said to them, "Let me make a request of you. Each of you give me an earring he has taken as booty." For the enemy had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. So apparently that was a thing that the Ishmaelites had. "We will willingly give them," they answered. So they spread a garment, and each threw into it an earring he had taken as booty. The weight of the gold earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, apart from the crescents and the pendants and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, and the collars that were on the necks of the camels. Gideon made an ephod of it and put it in his town, in Ophrah, and all Israelites prostituted themselves to it there, and became a snare to Gideon and to his family. So Midian was subdued before the Israelites, and they lifted up their hearts no more. So the land was at rest for 40 years in the days of Gideon. So we're going to see Gideon who gets a little too cocky, and he makes this ephod, and it becomes a case where this is probably not him trying to create a god or be directly idolatrous, but it becomes a snare. So he makes something, and this is why the Israelites are so against images, and you have to be really careful about that, because it's so easy to fall into the trap of the image. It's so easy to become, what's the word I'm looking for? Look into it as magic and that kind of superstitious. That was the word I was looking for. It's very easy to become superstitious. So he was probably trying to make something to be a symbol for the Lord, but it becomes a snare, and we're going to see how that plays out in the next generation. This will happen even later on. We'll see like the snake that Moses made in the desert, the bronze serpent, and that becomes an idol. And again, it wasn't meant to be. And if you go into some little old lady's houses and the amount of statues she has and sometimes how they treat them, or, if you're selling your house, please don't bury St. Joseph. That's not a thing. It's superstitious nonsense. You can bring St. Joseph into your house and pray to him, but don't bury St. Joseph in your garden. That's superstitious nonsense, and it's disrespectful to St. Joseph. We don't do that. It's not magic. We don't do that stuff. So it can creep into anyone. So it can creep into us too. So we have to be guardians. These are just images. That's not Jesus. That's Jesus in there, but that's just helps us to visualize. So it still happens today. Jerubbaal, son of Joash, went to live in his own town. Now Gideon had 70 sons, his own offspring, for he had many wives. Remember what we said about having many wives and how it usually leads to trouble? His concubine, who was in Shechem, who also bore him a son, and his name was Abimelech. Then Gideon, son of Joash, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash at Ophrah of the Abiezrites. As soon as Gideon died, the Israelites relapsed and prostituted themselves with the Baals, making Baal-berith their god. Then the Israelites did not remember the Lord their God, who had rescued them from the hand of their enemies on every side, and they did not exhibit loyalty to the house of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in return for all the good that he had done to Israel. Okay, I don't know if... Let me see. I don't know if we want to get into all of this. Yeah, we'll go through this. This doesn't take too long. Now Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem to his mother's kinsfolk and said to them and to the whole clan of his mother's family, "Say in the hearing of the Lord of Shechem, which is better for you, and all the 70 sons of Jerubbaal rule over you, or for to one rule over you? Remember also that I am the bone of your flesh and your flesh." So his mother's kinsmen spoke all the words of his behalf in the hearing of all the Lord of Shechem, and their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech. And they said, "He is our brother." They gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the temple of Baal-berith, in which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless fellows who followed him. He went into his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers and sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, survived, for he hid himself. Then all the lords of Shechem and Beth Millo came together, and they went and made Abimelech king by the oak of the pillar of Shechem. So we've seen how far the acorn has fallen. So not only is this kind of the offshoot, and again you have the problems because you have all these concubines and who's the legitimate son and who's not, but then you have him taking money from the temple of Baal, so he's gone full circle, and now he's worshiping Baal, and he uses that money to kill all of his brothers on a rock, and so that's not good. This is obviously it's come full circle, and this is the opposite of Gideon. When it was told to Jotham, he went and stood on the top of Mount Gerizim and cried out and said to them, "Listen to me, you lords of Shechem, so that God may listen to you. The trees once went out to anoint a king over themselves. So they said to the olive tree, 'Reign over us.' The olive tree answered them, 'Shall I stop producing my rich oil by the good and the mortals and honored, and go and sway over the trees?' Then the trees said to the fig tree, 'You come to reign over us.' But the fig tree answered him, 'Shall I stop producing my sweetness and my delicious fruit, and go sway over the trees?' Then the trees said to the vine, 'You come and reign over us.' But the vine said to them, 'Shall I stop producing my wine that cheers gods and mortals, and go to sway over the trees?' So all the trees said to the bramble, 'You come and reign over us.' And the bramble said to the trees, If in good faith you are anointing me king over you, then come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon." So basically what he's saying is, this is the crux of leadership, the problem of leadership, problem of politicians and anyone in power, specifically politicians. There's a G.K. Chesterton that like no one's good enough to lead, and the ones to be a politician, and the ones who want it are the least of them of all. And so it's that idea of like, the people who want to lead, who want to rule over people, the one who want to rule over the people are the ones who have thorns, or the ones who like, I want to make their presence felt, that kind of thing. So it's like, it's that warning against the people who want to be king. The reluctant leaders are usually the better leaders. And so this is the one, again, the son who wanted to be the leader is the bramble, the thorn, good for nothing, where all the other ones would rather not. And what do you have to do? It's a bramble. You have to like cut down the tree to have the bramble go over it, and it's going to light a fire, and it's going to start a problem, which was a big issue in Israel because it's less, so the bramble can become thorn and fire, and it's a big mess. Imagine dealing with thorns before real good gloves. Imagine how annoying that would be in the ancient world. And so you can understand why this is a big slight against his brother, and rightfully so. Now, therefore, if you acted in good faith and honor, then you made Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have done to him as his actions deserved, for my father fought for you and risked his life and rescued you from the hand of Midian, but you have risen up against my father's house this day and have killed his sons, 70 men on one stone, and have made Abimelech, the son of his slave woman, king over the lords of Shechem, because he is your kinsman. If I say you have acted in good faith and honor towards Jerubbaal and towards his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come out of Abimelech, and devour the lords of Shechem at Beth Millo. And let fire come from the lords of Shechem and from Beth Millo, and devour Abimelech. Then Jotham ran away and fled, going to Beer, where he remained for fear of his brother Abimelech. Abimelech ruled over Israel, and to be clear, he's not ruling over all of Israel. He's just over this specific region or tribe, so it's not all of Israel. For 3 years, but God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the lords of Shechem, and the lords of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech. This happened so that the violence done to the 70 brothers of Jerubbaal might be avenged, and the blood he be laid on the brothers of Abimelech, who killed them. And so the Lord of Shechem, who strengthened his hand to kill his brothers, so out of hostility to him, the lords of Shechem set ambushes on the mountaintops. They robbed all who passed by them along the way, and it was reported to Abimelech. When Gaal, son of Ebed, came into Shechem with his kinsfolk, the Lord of Shechem put confidence in him. They went out into the field and gathered the grapes from the vineyard, trod them, and celebrated. Then they went into the temple of their God, ate and drank, and ridiculed Abimelech. Gaal, son of Ebed, said, "Who is Abimelech, and who are we of Shechem, that we should serve him? Did not the son of Jerubbaal and Zebul, his officer, serve the men of Hamar, father of Shechem? Why then should we serve him? If only this people were under my command, then I would remove Abimelech. I would say to him, increase your army and come out." Then Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, son of Ebed. His anger was kindled. He sent messengers to Abimelech at Arumah, saying, "Look, Gaal, son of Ebed, and his kinsfolk have come to Shechem, and they are stirring up the city against you. Now, therefore, go by night, you and your troops that are with you, and lie in wait in the fields. Then early in the morning, as soon as the sun rises, get up and rush out of the city, and when he and his troops that are with him come up against you, you may deal with them as best you can." So Abimelech and all his troops with him got up by night and lay in wait against Shechem in 4 companies. Then Gaal, son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entrance of the gate of the city. Abimelech and his troops with those who rose up against him in ambush. And when Gaal saw him, he saw to Zebul, "Look, people are coming down from the mountaintop." And Zebul said to him, The shadows of the mountains look like people to you. Gaul spoke again and said, look, people are coming down from Tabul-Erez, and one company is coming from the direction of Elan, whatever that word is. Then Zebul said to him, where is your boast now, you who said, who is Abimelech, that we should serve him? Are not these the troops who made light of? Go out now and fight with them. So Gaul went out at the head of the lords of Shechem and fought with Abimelech. Abimelech chased him, and he fled before him. Many fell wounded, but to the entrance of the gate. But so Abimelech resided at Arumah, and Zebul drove out Gaul and his kinsfolk, so that they could not live on in Shechem. On the following day, the people went into the fields when Abimelech was told, he took his troops and divided them into 3 companies and lay in wait in the fields. Then he looked and saw the people coming out of the city. He rose against them and killed them. Abimelech and the company that he with them rushed towards and stood at the entrance of the gate of the city, while the 2 companies rushed on, and they were in the fields and killed them. Abimelech fought against the city that day. He took the city and killed the people who were in it, and he razed the city to the sword and sowed it with salt. Then all the lords of the tower of Shechem heard of it. They entered the stronghold of the temple of El-Bereth. Abimelech was told all the lords of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. So Abimelech went up to Mount Zalmon, he and all the troops that were with him. Abimelech took an axe in his hand, cut down a bundle of brushwood, and took it up and laid it on his shoulder. Then he said to his troops with him, that you have seen me do quickly, as I have done. So every one of the troops cut down a bundle and followed Abimelech, put it against the stronghold, and set the stronghold on fire over them. So when all the people of the tower of Shechem also died, about 1,000 men and women, then Abimelech went to Thebaz and encamped against Thabur and took it. But there was a strong tower within the city, and all the men and women and the lords of the city went to it and shut themselves in. And they went to the roof of the tower. Abimelech came to the tower. Abimelech came to the tower and fought against it, and came near to the entrance of the tower to burn it with fire. But a certain woman threw an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Immediately he called to the young man who carried his armor and said to him, draw your sword and kill me, so people will not say about me, a woman killed me. So the young man thrust him through, and he died. When the Israelites saw that Abimelech was dead, they all went home. Thus God repaid Abimelech for the crime he committed against his father in killing his 70 brothers. And God also made all the wickedness of the people of Shechem fall back on their heads, and on them came the curse of Jotham, son of Jerubbaal. Okay, that was a lot just to get to the millstone falling on his head. But so this is, again, so we had the story of Gideon getting better, and so this is the opposite kind of story. This is kind of like the boy who cried wolf, in that you tell the story of what not to do. So Abimelech is going to get his just desserts. So remember, he killed 70 of his brothers on a stone, remember, on one stone. And so how does he die? Literally a stone from heaven falls down and crushes his skull. And more than that, I love that poem, that he's so upset that a woman did it. It's not an arrow or something. It's like, oh, no, not a woman. Well, have we seen, remember, Jael, and remember Jael and all those other ones. So, yeah, God can use those women, too, sometimes. When he wants to crush the heads, it's usually a woman who's crushing the head of the serpent of evil. And so it's kind of comes full circle in that nice thing. And to realize this whole thing with Shechem is a big civil war. So this is like, you had the great battle with Gideon where there's thousands of troops, and these are petty little battles. That's the idea of this. This is him trying to rule this little town, and none of them can agree on who's to rule. So it's just this petty little nonsense of them fighting back and forth, and it's a tower here and a tower there and all this other kind of stuff. It's not, so it's showing you the pettiness of Abimelech. Even in his rule, he's not secure, and even in that, it fails, and he gets his head crushed on a stone, just as he crushed his brothers' skulls. So it's, don't be Abimelech. That's the story. Don't be Abimelech. Okay. We'll do just this beginning of chapter 10, and then we'll end there. After Abimelech, Tola, son of Puah, son of Dodo, a man of Israelite who lived in Shamir in the hill country of Ephraim, rose to deliver Israel. He judged Israel for 23 years. Then he died and was buried at Shamir. After him came Jair, the Gileadite, who judged Israel for 22 years. He had 30 sons and rode on 30 donkeys, and they had 30 towns, which are the land of Gilead, and are called Havroth Jair to this day. Jair died and was buried in Kaman. So these are probably two that had more like folk stories around them, but they don't get much of a written up in here. So that's okay. You get to be marked in the book because you were a judge and you did well. There's probably folk stories, but we don't know them, so okay, well, that's good. We're going to end there because then the next ones we start getting into the other big stories. So with Gilead, remember, even if you're fearful, keep following, do what's right, even despite your fear, and don't have a bunch of wives, and raise your kids right, or you'll have problems. Okay. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. All glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. God bless, and good night.